So we've talked about the problem of evil, motivating the problem, talking about why people are worried about this problem, what it's a problem for, that is traditional theism, committed to the omnipotence, omniscience, and omnibenevolence of God, and how it requires those assumptions in order to work. So let's talk a little bit about problems for the problem of evil, objections or replies, attempts to explain the existence of evil that are attempts which are consistent with the existence of God. So explaining how the God of traditional theism could or would allow for the existence of evil. Okay, so I'm a little lighter on the PowerPoint slides here, so y'all just take closer notes to what I say as opposed to what's on the PowerPoint slides. And we're going to first walk through a few of these sorts of defenses of theism that I think are not totally implausible, but less plausible and at least less popular. So we'll work through those a little more quickly, and then we'll look at two in particular that are a little bit more plausible and popular at the very least. Okay, so we're going to start this slideshow. Here's the problem of evil. Again, just to refresh you, if God existed, he would eliminate all evil, but evil exists, therefore God does not exist. Now, the support for one requires the omniscience, omnibenevolence, and omnipotence of God, because take away any one of those and one is no longer plausible. If God is not perfectly good, well, we no longer think that he would want to eliminate all evil then. Lots of people are pretty good, but not perfectly good, and we don't think that just pretty good people eliminate all evil that they can eliminate. Well, let's not take me as an example. I'm not sure that I'm even pretty good, but take any pretty good person you know, maybe you have a parent or a grandparent you respect, and yeah, a lot of times they will eliminate suffering or evil that they're able to eliminate, but not all the time, because they're not perfectly good. Okay, so if you take away perfect goodness, one no longer makes sense. We would expect to see some evil in the world if God was just pretty good. Take away omnipotence. He's not all powerful. He doesn't have full power. Well, then again, one is no longer plausible, because sometimes if God is not all powerful, then you might expect he wouldn't have the power to eliminate every instance of evil. So we would still expect to see evil in the world if such a God existed. And finally, take away omniscience. God doesn't know everything. Well, again, it might be, we wouldn't be surprised in such a case if God didn't know about certain instances of evil. And if even a morally perfect and all-powerful God didn't know about evil, we would still expect to see some evil in the world, because such a God is only going to eliminate evil that it knows about. Okay, so that's why those three assumptions are necessary. So let's look at four quick replies that we're not going to focus on, or at least not quite as much. So one you might kind of be drawn to initially is that evil is necessary for the existence of goodness. There has to be evil for there to be goodness. First, this is not at all clear. First, why think that evil would have to exist for good to exist? You might actually be thinking the next thing, that evil is necessary for us to recognize goodness as such. Maybe without evil, we wouldn't see good things as good. That may be a little bit more plausible, but this first claim is different. The second claim is an epistemological claim. It's about a claim about what we can know or recognize or understand. The first claim is an ontological claim. It's a claim about what can exist. And it says goodness just could not exist. Not that we couldn't recognize it, but it couldn't even exist without the existence of evil. There could be no purely good world, right? Such a world would not have goodness in it if it did not have evil in it. That seems false to start out. It seems like you could have a world that was perfectly good, but we don't even need that. It seems like most religions that endorse theism are going to be incompatible with this reply. Let me just take one example. This is not what we're focusing on. We're talking about theism in general, but let me just take one example. Take the example of Judaism or Christianity. Both are committed to, both endorse Genesis as a holy scripture, the book of Genesis, the first book of the Hebrew Bible and the first book of the Christian Bible. And that book says that there was a time when there was no evil, but there was goodness. look at the very first chapter of either of those books, the Hebrew Bible or the Christian Bible. The very first chapter of Genesis says, hey, God created this world, and he did it in 6 days. He rested on the seventh. And after each day of creation, he declared that what? If you're familiar with the story, it was good, right? So, and if you read that story, it's in chapter 2 or 3. I'm blanking on that now. It's either, I believe it's chapter 3. It's not until chapter 3 of Genesis that evil comes into the world. And it comes into the world by the act of a human being, right? Tempted by a serpent. But the world existed before that. Evil came into the world because of that act. Before that, it was just goodness, right? So if you hold these scriptures, then your view is incompatible with this reply. You can't say that evil is necessary for the existence of goodness. And even theism in general, if you're committed to the typical view of creation, God created the world, and before that, there was just God, or at the very least, there was God and some just blank material that had not been ordered. Depending on how you understand evil, there was no evil in that world, especially if you think God created the world from nothing, which is a very typical Christian view at the very least. I think lots of other religions hold to this, that before God's creation, there was nothing except for God, right? There was no stuff before the creation that he was just imposing order on. He created everything from nothing. Creation ex nihilo is the Latin word for that. Now, in that world, God existed. God was not evil. God is perfectly good. So there was goodness without evil before the creation. Okay, so this reply, I think, is implausible on its face independently of theism. I think anybody should grant that there could be goodness without evil. And if you accept theism, your view is actually incompatible with this reply on top of it being implausible. So let's look at the second reply. Without evil, we wouldn't be able to appreciate goodness. Oh, let me actually mention one more thing about the first reply. Even if you're not convinced by any of this, you think evil is necessary for the existence of goodness, and you think you have a reply, you think, well, theism could be made compatible with that. And maybe you're right. But here's the thing. Someone will say, okay, even if I grant you that, I personally am not going to grant you that. I don't think that's plausible. But someone might say, okay, I'll grant you that. But why would there need to be so much evil in the world? If all you need for goodness to exist is a little bit of evil, a good God might be compatible with a little bit of evil so that the world can be good, but he would not allow the vast amounts of evil that we see in the world. The Holodomor, for example, millions dead, right? Maybe one person needs to die every 100 years for goodness to exist. Or, I mean, it depends. Like, it's your question to answer if you endorse this view. How much evil has to exist in order for goodness to exist? I don't think it has to be in equal amounts, right? If you just need a little bit of evil for goodness to exist, you still face the question, why would a good God, all-powerful and all-knowing, allow the vast extent of evil when it was only a little bit that was necessary for goodness? So it's another reason this reply doesn't work. And that's the same reason the second reply doesn't work. Even if you grant that we wouldn't be able to appreciate or understand goodness as goodness without evil, I'm not sure about the merits of that view. It doesn't seem obvious to me. It seems a little bit more plausible than the first claim. But even if that's true, again, it seems like we can't explain the extent of evil in the world, right? If all we need to recognize goodness is a little bit of evil, and we need to feel a little bit of pain every now and again to realize, oh man, life is actually really good. That doesn't explain the extent of evil. That doesn't explain, childhood deformities in the womb, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, third, so these first two are replies to the first premise. They are attempts to understand why a God would allow evil, either because it's necessary for goodness or necessary for us to understand goodness as goodness. But this third reply is actually a reply to premise 2. It says evil does not exist. It is merely an illusion. There's no actual evil. It is just the illusion of evil. You could get more sophisticated on this reply and say, well, we just see it as evil. It's not actually evil. When the hurricane hits Houston, that's not actually evil. It just seems evil to us because it hurts us or something like that. It's not really bad. It's just nature, and nature is neither good nor bad, or maybe nature is just good or something like that. But again, I don't think this is plausible. I think your best case is in the case of natural evil as opposed to moral evil. The lion is not evil for eating the gazelle, right? But look at moral evil. Do we really want to say that the evils of the Holodomor, or the evils of the Holocaust, the evils of warfare are illusions? They're not actually bad. It's not actually bad when someone tortures a child to death. It's just an illusion. And you could explain this. Maybe if you had time, you could explain this to the child. Don't worry about it. You're being tortured to death, but don't worry about it. It's just an illusion that this is bad. It's not actually bad. So that seems implausible to me. I mean, maybe plausible for some kinds of evil, maybe certain kinds of natural evil, and maybe for lots of cases of pain, right? Maybe lots of cases of pain, it's painful, but we shouldn't, and it seems bad to us, but maybe we shouldn't think of it as bad, right? It's just an illusion that when we think it's bad, right? In fact, it's necessary for our growth, or it's necessary for our maturation or something like that. But other cases, it looks like this is just not going to work for. And in fact, probably the vast majority of moral evils, it's going to be totally implausible that it's an illusion. Finally, the existence of evil in the world makes us realize that we need God. The existence of suffering, the existence of the evil in a human heart, even the moral evil, makes us realize that we need God. And so if you accept this view, you might think, well, look, God, here's the fuller story. God knows that on most theistic views, God makes us for himself, in Augustine's words. We are made so that our good, the good life for a human, you can't tell the story of the good life for a human without mentioning God. A relationship with God, in some sense, on most theistic views, is a deeply integral part of the good life. Now, if you're God and you know that when you make your creatures, you're going to make sure that they are in relationship with you for their own good. So if it did turn out that humans were the kinds of things that were not going to turn to God and have a relationship with him without experiencing evil or suffering or death, then God maybe would have a reason to allow those things, or maybe even introduce them into the world. So again, we have to think about these two components of this reply. Is it really an integral part of the human good to be in relationship with God? That's the first part. Second part, can we not be in relationship with God if we don't experience suffering or evil? First part we'll grant for now, because that is a part of theistic views. There's nothing implausible about that. I'm inclined to that view myself. But the second part, do we really need evil and suffering to be in a relationship with God? Well, again, let's look back at some of the religious texts themselves. Again, I'm going to go back to Genesis just because it's what I know best. But this is common to many theistic views. There was a time at which humans were in communion with God. They were living as they ought without evil in the world. They introduced it later on. So it doesn't look like it was necessary for Adam and Eve, for the first humans before the fall, to experience evil in order to be in a relationship with God. So that's one thing. Another thing is, it might be that humans are such that we need evil. We need to experience evil in order to realize our need for God. But you also have to wonder, is it necessary that God created creatures like that? Could he have created creatures that realized they needed God without the existence of evil or suffering? I don't see any reason to think not, right? So I don't think this is a great reply for that reason. And finally, it falls to the same problem as the first two replies. If you need evil and suffering in order to realize you need God, yet still doesn't explain why we need the extent of evil and suffering as we see in the world. Why do we need the Holodomor? Why do we need the Holocaust? We could have realized we needed God with much less suffering and evil than that. Okay, so again, I don't want to, let me say this. As with everything in this course, there is room for disagreement here. And if you feel like I've unjustly treated one of these replies, your partialist reply, and you think, I'm not attacking you. Again, I actually myself am committed to theism. So I'm committed to finding a good reply to this, but I think we should treat this fairly. I think these are bad replies. At the same time, as with everything in this course, this is open for debate. If you think I've treated this unjustly, if you think there's something more to be said for one of these views, I invite it in the comments. Let's talk about it. And you know what? You might convince me. There's certainly things that I haven't said. You know, I'm trying to move through these things pretty quickly, and there's certainly subtleties you could add to these views that I haven't discussed. But let's look at the free will defense. This has been probably the most popular defense against the problem of evil historically. And, you know, there are different ways of running this defense, but it runs something like this, super simplistically. God values free will in his creatures so much that it's worth it to create free creatures if evil is the cost. And it just so turns out that God could not have created a world with free creatures but no evil. That's not something he could have done. Now, that doesn't mean he's not all powerful. Like we said in the Attributes of God video, it doesn't diminish the power of a being just that he can't do something if that thing is something logically impossible or maybe even metaphysically impossible. Broadly speaking, if it's something that no being could do, then it's not something that diminishes the power of a being if it can't do. It's a complicated way of saying that. But omnipotent beings, in other words, can't do some things, and that doesn't mean they're not omnipotent or all powerful. And if it really is impossible to create a world, if there's no possible world out there where there are free creatures and no evil, or if it's impossible to create such a world, which might be a different thing, then God could still be omnipotent even though he can't create such a world. Now, let's evaluate. Look, we got two components here. We can ask ourselves, is free will really that valuable? Such that if it came down to choosing between a world with free creatures but evil or a world with no evil but no free creatures, it would be worth it to create the world with evil and free creatures. Is that true? I think that's plausible. I mean, you know, I don't want to be dense or tone deaf here. I don't mean to say that like it's easy to outweigh the evils in the world. The Holodomor, deeply evil, very deeply evil. And I don't even know if this is really a game of weighing the value of free will versus the disvalue of the Holodomor. That seems to imply some sort of consequentialism, which I am not really happy with. But it does seem like, let me just say this without committing to anything super controversial. It does seem like so many, I'm going to stop sharing here just to change the scenery for a second. It does seem like all of the value that we impute to people in general depends on their free will, right? I mean, imagine super sci-fi scenario in which, it's not so sci-fi anymore. If you come to respect someone and you think, wow, he's a really good person, really admire him. He's done some really good things. He stood up to temptation, or he, put it all on the line, made tons of sacrifices for what he believed in and, sacrificed a lot of money and fame and prestige and whatever. I'm just kind of trying to expand here. Gives you some details that might draw someone into mind, although I'm not thinking of someone in particular. If you found out that this was maybe you're learning about this person over the internet, if you found out that it was a fake account or something like this was a fictional personality, or if you found out that this was some sort of AI that was generating all of these responses, you'd think, well, it's not valuable anymore. If you admired this person, even in face-to-face interaction, you found out that they were some sort of robot that had no control over their actions, you'd think, well, you would lose your respect. You would lose your admiration, right? You might admire the person who designed that robot, but you're not going to admire that robot. Seems like the value of those actions, those sentiments, those virtues depended on that creature being free to develop those actions and virtues and character traits, etc. There's probably some better real world cases of this now, but we'll talk more about that maybe later. But the essential idea here is that it does look like the value of a human life does depend on our being free. And such that if humans went out of the world and assumed that no other creatures in the world are really genuinely free, the world would lose something of deep value, right? And so again, it's really hard, when we think about God choosing to create the world, we're not thinking kind of about some mundane decision. We can't really compare that to any mundane decision we could make, or even any grand decision we could make, right? Who of us is out there creating worlds, except, like maybe virtually or something, or I guess writing novels or something. But it's not the same thing. So it's not like we can talk ourselves into understanding sort of what was going on when God created the world, but you can kind of get an idea. It does seem like free will, the free decision to do or to inculcate some character trait in ourselves, is essential to the value of those actions and character traits. Without them, there would be no value, or there would be far less value, or a very different kind of value. So I'm tempted to say this first part does seem plausible to me. The second part, oh dang, I'm back. Here we go. Second part, that God could not have created a world with free creatures but no evil, is a little bit more tenuous. People have objected to this claim. They say, why could he have not created a world where there were free creatures but they never did wrong? And we can't go into the details here, but maybe you can start to see why this is a plausible claim, even if there are objections to it. You might imagine someone saying, well, look, why couldn't God just create that world that had free creatures in it, free humans who had free choice, but they just never chose to do evil? Why couldn't he have done that? So here's where we kind of come apart. I sort of vaguely referenced this earlier. It might be possible for there to be a world with free creatures who never do wrong. But that doesn't mean that God, even if he is omnipotent, can create that world, right? In the same sense that it is maybe possible for me to have children that never fight. But it's impossible for me to choose to have those children. It's something that would have to kind of happen by chance, or it's not really chance, but it's totally outside of my control. It's really in their control. And that's part of what it means to have free will. So when God chooses to create a world with free will, even if it is possible for those free creatures to never do wrong, it's not something that he can decide in the creation of the world. It's something that he has to say, yeah, it's possible. It's improbable. I think he probably would know, but it's possible, but it's not something that I can determine in the act of creation itself. That's part of what it is to have free will. God is handing us power to do something that he cannot have control over. He's choosing not to have control over it, maybe. Okay, so if that's true, this seems like a good explanation for moral evil. If you're going to create a world where creatures are robustly free, they always have the option to do right or wrong, or good or bad, or whatever. Then they're sometimes going to do evil. They're sometimes going to be bad people. Sometimes they're going to be really, really bad, but most of the time they're just going to, a lot of the time they're going to be pretty bad. And maybe sometimes they'll be good, and sometimes they'll be really good. But we'll expect to see moral evil in the world. This doesn't totally vanquish the objections to this second component here, that God could not have created a world with free creatures but no evil. Someone might come in and say, well, what if God created free creatures, but every time they were fixing to do something bad, he popped in and stopped them? But he made it look like it was just an accident, right? He didn't make them think that they had no power. He just popped in and stopped them. And we won't fully reply to this sort of objection, but you could see, I'll invite y'all to think about it. Would that, I'll stop there. Y'all just think about that. Would that constitute robust free will? Would those creatures' actions have the kind of value that our actions have? Our actions, we who have the ability to go really right or really wrong, and we really could go really wrong. Would a creature's would their good actions have the same values the value that ours have if they were prevented from doing something bad every time they tried? Okay, so we'll stop there on that. We have a good explanation here of the existence of moral evil. Free creatures are going to act evilly, if that's a word. They're going to act wrongly. They're going to do bad things. We don't yet have an explanation on this free will defense of the existence of natural evil, right? Because at least it seems plausible that our actions are choosing to do the bad over the good, the wrong over the right, the vicious over the virtuous, does not cause hurricanes to happen, does not cause tornadoes, does not cause smallpox, it does not cause COVID. Maybe it did, though. The jury's still out on that. But so how do we get an explanation, if we take this route, for natural evil? Well, there's a few things you could say here. How can we explain the evils of the natural world? Now, you could say, well, we're just going to find a different explanation for that, right? Maybe there's some other explanation for that. Or you could say, actually, this defense does explain the existence of natural evil. And you could do that in a few ways. So one thing is that our moral evil does actually, as we saw when we distinguished between natural and moral evil, we saw there are tons of fuzzy cases. Lots of cases of evils we suffer, at least apparently as a result of a natural event, have a huge moral component to them. They often it looks like this could have not happened if it weren't for our choices that we made. Think about the snowpocalypse when Texas froze over. Lots of people lost electricity. This was February of 2021. People lost electricity. Some people died. People lost water. Now, in one sense, it was a natural disaster, and it was. It was certainly a natural disaster, but the evils that came of it, it wouldn't have been evil on its own necessarily, right? The evils that came of it came about because humans had made the sort of decisions that we had made. We didn't insulate our pipes for natural gas. Those froze up. We couldn't get natural gas to places that it needed to go. Again, I don't know the full extent of it, but I know that played a part. I know that it played a part that our wind energy froze up, was not able to produce energy. We don't know exactly the proportion of the evil that caused. So it looks like lots of the bad things that resulted from the snowpocalypse were results of people being stupid. Now, that might not be a moral evil. You wouldn't go to that person who funded wind energy or decided not to insulate the pipes. You wouldn't immediately say they had had a moral failing. But it could be, right? Maybe they did it to save money. Maybe they were sort of negligent, like, well, we could look into this and test it and see what the chances are of it freezing, but let's not worry about it. It's probably not going to happen. So it could be a moral failing, right? And even if it's a purely intellectual failing, that could be the result of our free will and our deciding not to research in the right ways. It might be that in a fully redeemed world, in a world where people really are in full submission to God, it could be that we would be able to figure stuff out like that. Maybe. So that's one way you could expand the free will defense to explain certain natural evils. You're probably not going to be able to explain all natural evils that way, right? Because trisomy 18, again, it's a disorder I don't know a ton about, but I know that babies will kind of get this disorder. It's a genetic disorder. They'll get it in utero. They don't get it. They are conceived with it, I believe. I don't think it develops after conception. And it's fatal. They often die in the womb. I think if they survive outside the womb, it is a horrible, miserable existence, and they don't live for very long. It's usually weeks, maybe months when they do survive outside the womb. And on top of that, they're impaired in many really horrible ways. Is that because of something we've done? Well, I guess we don't know for sure. It could be because of horrible environmental decisions we've made. It could be because we, use plastic so much in our food grade stuff. It could be because of pollution and people breathing pollution. We don't know, I guess. I mean, it's probably not. Again, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. It's a genetic disorder. So that kind of points to it not being that, but we don't know, I guess. We don't know. But I guess what I'm saying is it's very improbable that all natural evils like that are the result of human decisions that we could make better. So there are going to be some natural evils that probably can't be explained, even optimistically, by human moral evil. But here's a different way you could develop the free will defense to explain natural evil. If you believe, as many Jews and Christians do, and people from other religions, if you believe that there are supernatural beings that have free will that are not God and are not human, and you believe that some of them have gone wrong, you could explain the existence of natural evil that way. So in crass terms, you could say that the existence of tornadoes and hurricanes and things like this is it could be demons in rebellion ultimately causing that. That's not incompatible with naturalistic explanations, but you could say that these are the things that are ultimately driving those sorts of evils. Now, I won't speak to the plausibility of that. Some of y'all are sitting there thinking, that seems crazy. Demons are causing tornadoes. Demons are causing trisomy 18. Demons are causing snowpocalypse. You're totally entitled to that position. On the other hand, if you are from a religion that is committed to the existence of evil spiritual forces at work that are neither human nor God, there are probably ways to reconcile this with the truths of the natural sciences so that you're not a total nut job denying the laws of physics, etc. And this could help explain why natural evils occur. Maybe. Then again, maybe you think that's totally nutty, right? We could talk about that, but maybe at this point we should move on. If that's a commitment that is friendly to your background assumptions, that is a way that you could help make sense of natural evil on the free will defense. If it's not, you think it's nutty, then the free will defense may not work for you to explain natural evil. It may only help explain moral evil and some fuzzy cases where the natural and the moral are kind of interacting in the ways we talked about. Okay, let's talk about let's end this video here, and I'll talk about the other reply that we could make in the next video.